Hi, have you ever noticed how strange the human mind can be? You can know exactly what you need to do and still find yourself doing the opposite. You can tell yourself, I'm going to stop worrying. And then, 5 minutes later, your mind is already imagining everything that could possibly go wrong. You can decide, this time I'm going to be confident. But the moment you're in front of other people, that familiar little voice appears. What if I embarrass myself? You can promise yourself that you're going to stop procrastinating. And yet, somehow, you find yourself scrolling through your phone instead of doing the thing you've been thinking about for weeks. And perhaps the most frustrating part is, you know better. You consciously want to change. You genuinely want to change. So why is changing yourself sometimes so much harder than making the decision to change? Joseph Murphy believed the answer lies in a part of your mind that you rarely think about, your subconscious mind. Because while your conscious mind is making plans for the person you want to become, your subconscious may still be holding on to the person you've learned to be. And if that is true, then perhaps the question isn't simply, how do I force myself to change? Perhaps the better question is, what have I been repeatedly teaching my mind to believe? Take a moment, forget everything else for a while, and let's explore that question together. Welcome to Actionable Listener. Today, we're going inside a book that has been influencing the world of personal development for more than 6 decades. The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy. And this isn't simply a book about thinking positive thoughts. At its heart, it's about something much more interesting, the possibility that the thoughts you repeatedly think, the beliefs you repeatedly accept, and the mental pictures you repeatedly create may gradually influence the way you behave, respond, and experience your life. So before we get into the ideas, let's first get to know the man behind this book. Joseph Murphy was born in Ireland in 1898 and later moved to the United States. He spent years studying religion, philosophy, mysticism, and ideas about the human mind. He eventually became a minister, teacher, and prolific writer, authoring more than 30 books. He became particularly known for his work around the subconscious mind and the power of belief. The Power of Your Subconscious Mind was first published in 1963 and became his most famous work. Murphy wasn't simply interested in telling people to think positively. He wanted people to understand why they often seem to work against themselves. Why does someone desperately want success but constantly expect failure? Why does someone want love but keep expecting rejection? Why does someone want confidence but repeatedly tell themselves they're not good enough? And why do some thoughts seem to appear automatically, even when we consciously don't want them? Murphy believed that the answer was a relationship between the conscious and subconscious mind. And that is exactly what we're going to explore today. By the end of this summary, you'll understand what Murphy meant when he said that your subconscious mind has enormous influence over your life. We'll look at why repeated thoughts can become deeply rooted patterns, why your beliefs can influence the way you behave, how Murphy used visualization, affirmation, and prayer as ways of impressing ideas upon the subconscious, why fear can become stronger when we constantly rehearse it, why trying too hard can sometimes make things worse, and how Murphy applied these ideas to success, money, relationships, forgiveness, happiness, and everyday life. Most importantly, we'll take these ideas out of the world of theory and ask, how can we actually use them? Because listening to a book like this and feeling inspired for 20 minutes is easy. The real transformation begins when you start noticing what your own mind has been practicing every day. So, let's start with the most important distinction Murphy makes. Think about your mind as having 2 different levels. Your conscious mind is the part you're using right now. It's the part that makes decisions. It says, I want to become healthier. I want to start my business. I need to finish this work. I shouldn't have reacted that way. I want to become more confident. Your conscious mind can reason, question, and choose. But then there is the subconscious mind. Murphy describes this deeper part of the mind as something that stores impressions and patterns and influences many of the automatic responses we have. Think about something as simple as driving. When you first learn, you consciously think about almost everything. brake, accelerator, steering, mirrors, signals. But after enough repetition, you don't have to consciously analyze every movement. The behavior becomes familiar, automatic, and Murphy believed that many patterns in our lives develop in a similar way. You repeat a thought, you experience an emotion, you respond in a particular way, you repeat again, and eventually the pattern starts feeling natural. That's why sometimes you don't even have to think before reacting. Someone says something, and you immediately become defensive. Something doesn't go according to plan, and your mind immediately expects the worst. You receive an opportunity, and before you could even consider it, a voice tells you, "I'm probably not good enough." You may not have consciously chosen that response. It has simply become familiar, and this is where Murphy gives us one of the most memorable images in the entire book. He compares the subconscious mind to fertile soil. Imagine a farmer planting seeds. The soil doesn't stop the farmer and say, "Wait, this is a good seed, so I'll grow it," or "This is a bad seed, so I won't." It simply provides the conditions for whatever is planted to grow. Murphy believed your subconscious works in a similar way. The thoughts you repeatedly impress upon your mind can become like seeds. Now, this idea needs to be understood carefully. It doesn't mean that if you think about something hard enough, the universe is obligated to give it to you. And it certainly doesn't mean that every unfortunate event in someone's life was caused by their thoughts. Those are much bigger claims than we can responsibly make. But there's a practical idea here that is worth paying attention to. The thoughts you repeat can influence what you notice. They can influence what you expect. And what you expect can influence how you behave. Imagine two people getting the exact same opportunity. One thinks, "I'm probably going to fail." So she hesitates. She finds reasons not to try. She imagines embarrassment. Eventually, she walks away. Another person thinks, "I might fail, but I can learn." She tries. Maybe she fails. But instead of treating failure as proof that she's incapable, she treats it as information. She tries again. The opportunity was the same. But their internal assumptions created very different responses. And that is why Murphy keeps coming back to belief. Because a belief isn't just a sentence you say. It's an expectation about reality. If you deeply believe you're incapable, you'll often behave cautiously. If you believe that you can learn, you're more likely to experiment. If you believe everyone is against you, you'll notice rejection everywhere. If you believe that people can be trusted, you'll interpret the same situation differently. Your belief becomes a kind of filter. And if you want to change the results you're getting, sometimes you have to examine the filter you're looking through. This is where Murphy introduces techniques such as affirmations. An affirmation, in his approach, isn't simply about standing in front of a mirror and shouting positive sentences. The deeper idea is repetition. You're deliberately introducing a new thought into a mind that has been rehearsing an old one. Imagine that you've spent years telling yourself, "I can't do this." Now imagine replacing it with, "I am learning how to do this." Notice the difference. You're not pretending you're already perfect. You're giving your mind a new direction. And then comes the second part, action. If you tell yourself, "I am becoming confident," but continue avoiding every situation that makes you uncomfortable, the statement remains just a statement. But if you say it and then take one small action, you create evidence. You speak up once. You make the phone call. You publish the video. You apply for the opportunity. You try again after failing. And slowly, your behavior begins supporting the belief. This is one of the most useful ways to understand Murphy's philosophy today. Don't use affirmations to escape reality. Use them to help create a better response to reality. Murphy also places enormous importance on visualization. He encourages readers to create a mental picture of what they desire and repeatedly impress that picture upon the subconscious. And again, we can understand this in a practical way. Think about athletes. Before an important performance, many athletes mentally rehearse what they're going to do. They imagine the movement, the timing, the environment, the response. Why? Because mental rehearsal can make an action feel more familiar. The same idea can be applied to everyday life. If you have an important conversation tomorrow, instead of spending an entire night imagining everything going wrong, picture yourself listening calmly, speaking clearly, pausing before reacting, handling an uncomfortable moment without losing control. You're not guaranteeing the outcome. You're rehearsing the response you want to bring into the situation. And this becomes particularly interesting when Murphy talks about the moments before sleep. Think about how often we end our day by worrying. You finally get into bed, the house becomes quiet, and suddenly your brain decides it's the perfect time to replay everything. What if this happens tomorrow? Why did I say that? What if something goes wrong? What if I can't handle it? And then you wonder why your mind feels exhausted. Murphy suggests using this quiet period differently. Before sleep, instead of repeatedly feeding your mind fear, give it a constructive image. Imagine yourself calm. Imagine yourself capable. Imagine yourself handling tomorrow's challenge. Again, we don't have to accept Murphy's spiritual explanation to see the practical value in deliberately ending the day with a calmer mental focus. Because what you repeatedly rehearse becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar can influence how you respond. This brings us to fear. Fear is one of the clearest examples of how mental rehearsal can work against us. Imagine you're afraid of public speaking. You don't just experience the fear when you're standing on stage. You experience it days before. You imagine everyone staring at you. You imagine forgetting your words. You imagine people judging you. You replay the imagined disaster again and again. By the time the actual event arrives, you've already practiced the fear dozens of times. Murphy's approach is to change the rehearsal. Instead of asking, what if everything goes wrong? Begin asking, what if I can handle whatever happens? That's a completely different mental direction. You're not promising yourself that nothing will go wrong. You're building confidence in your ability to respond. And this connects beautifully with another idea Murphy discusses, what he calls the law of reversed effort. Have you ever tried so hard to fall asleep that you couldn't sleep? The more you tell yourself, I have to sleep now, the more awake you become. Or perhaps you've tried desperately to remember someone's name. You know it. You concentrate harder. You become frustrated. And suddenly, nothing. Then later, when you stop trying, the name appears. Murphy believed that excessive effort can sometimes create mental resistance. And this doesn't mean we should stop working toward our goals. It means there's a difference between effort and desperation. You can work seriously towards something without constantly telling yourself, if this doesn't happen, I'm finished. You can prepare and then trust your preparation. You can take action without obsessively controlling the outcome. This idea becomes especially powerful when Murphy talks about success. He believes that people often carry subconscious ideas about what they deserve, what is possible for them, and what they are capable of achieving. If you repeatedly think, people like me don't succeed, you may unconsciously avoid the very actions that could change your situation. You may never apply, never ask, never begin, never take the risk, not because someone physically stopped you, but because your own expectations stopped you first. And this is why changing your internal dialogue matters. Not because thoughts magically rearrange reality, but because thoughts can influence behavior, and behavior is what creates results. The same principle appears when Murphy talks about money. He encourages readers to replace thoughts of scarcity with more constructive attitude toward prosperity. Now, this is another place where we should separate the philosophy from reality. Thinking, I'm going to be rich, doesn't make you financially successful, but believing that you can learn about money, believing that opportunities exist, believing that your skills can improve, can make you more willing to learn, work, save, invest, and create. Your mindset doesn't replace financial literacy. It can influence whether you develop it. Murphy also brings these ideas into relationships. And here, his message is surprisingly simple. You cannot control another person's mind. You cannot force someone to love you. You cannot force someone to understand you. You cannot make another person behave exactly the way you want. But you can examine the expectations you bring into relationships. Do you constantly expect rejection? Do you assume people will disappoint you? Do you carry old hurt into every new relationship? Do you interpret every disagreement as proof that someone doesn't care? When those expectations become deeply rooted, you may begin seeing everything through them. A neutral message feels cold. A disagreement feels like abandonment. A mistake feels like betrayal. Murphy encourages the reader to work on their own mental attitude rather than constantly try and control other people. And that naturally leads to another important theme: forgiveness. Think about how strange resentment can be. Someone hurt you once, but you replay it 100 times. The event happened in the past, yet your mind keeps bringing it into the present. Forgiveness, in Murphy's philosophy, is not about saying that what happened was acceptable. It's about refusing to keep carrying the emotional weight of it. You don't forgive because the person deserves your forgiveness. Sometimes you forgive because you deserve your own peace. And perhaps this is one of the deepest ideas hidden inside the book. Your subconscious doesn't only need new goals. It may need freedom from old mental patterns, old fears, old resentment, old assumptions, old stories about who you are. Because if you keep telling yourself, "This is just who I am," you may unknowingly turn a temporary pattern into an identity. And that's why changing your life often begins with a question. Not, "What is wrong with me?" but, "What have I been repeatedly practicing?" Maybe you've been practicing worry. Maybe you've been practicing self-doubt. Maybe you've been practicing avoidance. Maybe you've been practicing comparison. And if you've practiced something long enough, it can begin to feel like your personality. But a pattern isn't necessarily your identity. It can be changed, slowly, repeatedly, through a different thought, followed by a different action, followed by another and another. That is where Murphy's message becomes actionable. Don't try to change your entire life tonight. Choose one area. Maybe confidence, maybe discipline, maybe fear, maybe money, maybe relationships. Ask yourself, what do I currently believe about this? Then ask, is this belief helping me or limiting me? And finally, what would I need to believe instead? Don't choose some impossible statement that your mind immediately rejects. Choose something believable enough to practice. I am learning to trust myself. I can become more confident. I can handle difficult situations one step at a time. I am capable of learning new skills. Then repeat it, visualize it, and most importantly, act on it. Because your subconscious isn't a magical shortcut around effort. The most powerful use of Murphy's ideas is to make your inner world and outer behavior start moving in the same direction. And when they do, change becomes much easier. So, if we strip away all the spiritual language and the ideas that belong specifically to Murphy's philosophy, what remains? A surprisingly practical message. Pay attention to what you repeatedly tell yourself, because your thoughts influence what you notice. Your beliefs influence what you expect. Your expectations influence how you behave. And your repeated behaviors eventually become the patterns that shape your life. So before we finish, let's keep a few ideas from this book with us. First, your mind is constantly being trained. Whether you realize it or not, repetition is teaching you something. The question is whether you're teaching yourself something useful. Second, don't underestimate familiar thoughts. A thought you repeated for years can feel like truth simply because it's familiar. Familiar doesn't always mean true. Third, use visualization as rehearsal. Don't simply imagine receiving the result. Imagine becoming the person capable of handling the process. Fourth, don't feed the fear you're trying to escape. If your mind constantly rehearses disaster, deliberately practice rehearsing your response instead. Fifth, don't confuse positive thinking with magical thinking. A thought is not a substitute for action. Belief should give you courage to act, not permission to sit still. And finally, choose your mental seeds carefully, because every day you're planting something. A thought, an expectation, a belief, a reaction, a habit, and eventually those little things begin to shape the person you become. So tonight, before you sleep, instead of asking yourself, What's wrong with my life? Ask yourself something more powerful. What have I been repeatedly telling my mind about my life? And then ask, what would I like to teach it instead? Because perhaps changing your life doesn't always begin with changing your circumstances. Sometimes it begins much more quietly, with a thought, then another, then a new choice, and eventually a new way of living. This is Actionable Listener. And remember, don't just listen to an idea. Use it